Grant Shapps, important announcements on the green list, but also you'll know, I'm sure, what the best-selling newspaper has got on its front page today. Allegations concerning the private life of the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock. The headline looks terrible. In recent months, people have not been able to hug their dying grandparents. But the man who's been telling us how to lead our private lives caught there at the Department of Health in a passionate embrace with a taxpayer-funded aide. He ought to resign, ought he not?
Well, look, first of all, I've always followed the sort of principle of comment on, our vaccine rollouts and the government business. But commenting on people's private lives is a different matter. We don't live in a world where, everyone has to have their own personal private life played out in public.
I do have to. There's you can say it's a private matter, but this is a public building. This was apparently an NHS event. This is the man that's been leading this entire strategy, telling us what to do with our lives, telling us who not to touch, who not to hug. People will be opening the papers this morning and they will very much be seeing this not as a private matter, given how much the government has interfered in our own private lives. So it's a bit rich to say, well, it's a private matter, even though it was a public building, even though it was an NHS event where these pictures were taken.
Yeah, I mean, look, as I say, politicians are human beings, right? And they have private lives. They'll have relationships and the rest of it. I'm able to, come on and talk about our world-leading vaccination program. By the way, I noticed we've overtaken Israel for the most vaccinated first vaccinations, which is extraordinary because they've been doing so well. And that is presumably because of the work of the health department and the health secretary and the rest of it. It's very difficult for me to knowledgeably comment on somebody's private life. That's something that you'd need to talk to them about. What I can say with confidence is the job that's been going on in terms of getting the vaccination out, the level of genome sequencing, the fact that you and I are able to have two tests per week, lateral flow tests per week. I don't know any other country in the world that's doing that. Certainly no major economy.
And by many measures,
things that I know that the health department has given us.
And by many measures, the Secretary of State has done under incredibly trying circumstances. He is, as well as setbacks, there have been amazing advances, world-leading advances, led by this Department of Health, and we, of course, give them credit for that. We ought to remember as we look, and I don't, yes, we are dwelling on this front page, and I make no apology for it, except this, actually, I do apologise because at the centre of this, as always, there are other people, there are spouses and there are children, and that's terribly sad. But there is also this, and this is why this is not wholly and exclusively a private matter. The opposition is saying today, quote, ministers, as you say, Grant Shapps, like everyone, are entitled to a private life. However, when taxpayers' money is involved, or jobs are being offered to close friends who are in a personal relationship with a minister, then that needs to be looked into. The government needs to be open and transparent about whether there are any conflicts of interest or rules that have been broken. You do not want to create an impression of a government mired in sleaze, which is why he has to resign.
So in terms of procurement or rather people coming on board and working in the government, there are very, very strict rules that the civil service deploy, that even as a minister, you have no terrific control over because, and quite rightly, these things are done independently. So there's an appointments process. Somebody has to be fully qualified for the role. It depends on the actual role, but you'll get people who are put through the process and then they'll come to ministers and say this person's appointable, this person isn't appointable for many different roles. I don't know the details of this, I'm afraid. Like you, I've just seen it for the first time this morning, but I do know that a full process would have been followed. And my understanding is this isn't a recent, in the last few months, appointment either. So, as I say, I fear we're in danger of finding other routes into sort of just really wanting to talk about somebody's private life. And as you rightly say, that's a matter for the health secretary, his family and the rest of it. I'm not sure it's a matter.
Secretary of State, I'm not setting myself up as a moralist, but I know there are people out there who are more morally inclined and they say, this goes to somebody's character and this sort of stuff matters. I'm not saying for a moment that this applies to Matt Hancock, but generally speaking, I've heard it said by people that, if you are prepared to lie to your partner or your spouse, then that calls into questions about your character. Lie to your spouse, you may find it easier to lie to the voters and to the public. So there are questions about probity which go beyond the private sphere.
Yeah, look, we had this in the 90s, didn't we? John Major's Back to Basics campaign. I don't want to live in that kind of world. I don't think most people do. We don't live in that sort of Puritan society, and we all choose to live our lives in different ways. But I think actually it is entirely separate from the way that somebody does their job, and it doesn't actually have much for me to sort of be commenting on somebody else's private relationships.
Just in a word, had you heard the rumours?
No, I hadn't actually. No.
Okay. Grant Shapps, we really appreciate you being so candid about it. It's a difficult story for everybody to cover. We think it's important, and we appreciate you speaking quite so frankly. Thanks very much.
I think it's the context for me personally. It's the context under which this has happened. That's the key thing. But coming up next, should pregnant women be offered up to £400 of shopping vouchers to quit smoking? We'll be discussing that next.